So we've got several of you students with your professors today, several classes together, and we are presenting various posters for about 5 minutes each. And we're going to engage the presenters in sequence. And Andrew Harrington, who is a graduate student and clinical fellow at the university, is going to introduce our students to come forward, and then he'll lead them in the presentations. Andrew.
All right, hi everybody. So I'm going to ask all the presenters who are presenting in this session to come up and just take a seat anywhere up here. So we have Courtney, Jaden, Tessa, Alyssa, Paige, Isabella, Erica, Thela, Amanda, and Scott as well. So if you all are here, please come up and take a seat up here, and we will get started. Do we not have enough chairs? Do we need some more chairs?
Yeah, take our seat.
We can get some more chairs.
We'll make a whole.
Okay. All right, we might need some more chairs, or we're gonna have to swap off here in a little bit for the three. You're gonna swap off. Okay, that's great. Okay, so for our first presentation here, we have in Dr. Jennifer Bates' class, we have Courtney Ferric. Can you raise your hand, Courtney? You're right there. Okay, wonderful. Make sure we get you to a mic so that you can speak. But we will start with your presentation on animal experimentation and the environment. So take it away, Courtney, and then we will maybe have a question or a small discussion afterwards. So go ahead.
Okay. So I did my presentation on animal experimentation in the environment. So just in general, animal experimentation is a procedure done on live animals to test medicinal and industrial products, and doing this causes harm to the environment. So the first harmful factor that it causes is pollution and incineration. And incineration is just the burning of waste. So animal waste that contain toxic chemicals are incinerated. Gases produced from the incineration of animal carcasses causes air pollution. The temperatures that are needed to maintain incinerators have resulted in incineration to not be environmentally sound. Incineration can also be very harmful to human health. This causes chronic illnesses and developmental delays. Something else that is harmful to the environment is the waste production that it causes. The animal body's needles, bedding, caging, and syringes are disposed of. Disposal of hazardous waste produces harmful substances and air pollutants. Animal carcasses are the most chemically and biologically hazardous waste. And according to the National Institute of Health, waste from their animal testing facilities totaled 1.5 million pounds from 2011 to 2013. Then Peter Singer is a utilitarian animal liberationist that we studied in class. And he believes that animal experimentation causes senseless harm and that medical research is deeply problematic. He says it's problematic because we would never experiment on a 6-month-old human to save lives. And overall, he says experimentation causes suffering and must cease. And then this graph just shows what type of animals are usually experimented on and how many. This is from 2016. And the most experimented animal is guinea pigs. And some other ones are rabbits, hamsters, pigs, cats, and a whole bunch of other animals. And then this picture in the bottom shows rabbits being tested, testing cosmetic products.
Okay, thank you, Courtney. Let's give her a round of applause there. Thank you for that. I think we can move. I think that's a very effective presentation, and I think we have, since we have such a large audience in this one, I think we'll go around and we have a couple mic runners. Hopefully, somebody will be running them. Yeah, we have Noah over here, and then we might have one more other mic runner. So I think at your tables, just take a few moments to discuss maybe some of your main thoughts or reflections from this presentation. And if anyone wants to share those, we can go around and we have a few minutes to just talk about that before we move on to the next class session. So when you're ready or whatever, somebody at your table, please raise your hand and one of our mic runners will run around to you and get you the mic to either ask a question or take a reflection or something away from this presentation. Thanks.
Hi, thanks for your presentation. So what's an alternative then, right? If the conclusions are it needs to cease on animal experimentation, did you find anything in terms of what would be alternatives for this, particularly with medicinal trials before they reach human subject testing?
Yeah, so they said that animal testing is kind of always going to be necessary to protect the public health, but they are testing, they're doing cell-based testing now. It's still kind of new though, so there's not a lot of information on it to try to get away from testing on animals. They kind of said it's always going to be necessary to protect us from what we're using.
Any other questions or reflections, comments? Yes, we got one over here. Thank you, Noah.
Hello, my name is Scott. My question was around Peter Singer. You mentioned Peter Singer was a utilitarianist, but also against animal testing. Is that not somewhat contradictory because animal testing can help to, contribute to the greater good of humanity?
I don't know. He just said that his problem is with the suffering of animals, so he just didn't like the idea that we were harming the animals he said it for basically no reason.
The key reason would be to better humanity.
Yeah, but
No, I know that was kind of a gotcha question, I guess. But we were also discussing how this could be a utilitarianism in just a human sense, and how animals should not be used for humans. We should, utilize the best of humanity has to offer and just leave animals out of it, kind of thing. So that was our reflection at the table. So that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. Any other questions, comments? No? Okay. All right. Well, then we will be moving on to the next. Let's give a round of applause again to Courtney here. Okay, so we're going to move on to the next class session, and that is Professor Eric Garrett's class, and we'll start with Jaden. If you make sure, Jaden, there you go. Okay, raise your hand. Thank you, Jaden. All right, we're going to pull your presentation up there, which it's now on the screen, so take the floor, Jaden.
Hello, I'm Jaden, and basically we were assigned to do research on a nonprofit organization, and I was assigned with Tree Pittsburgh. So basically, what is Tree Pittsburgh? It is an environmental nonprofit organization, obviously, and their main mission is to enhance community vitality by restoring and protecting the urban forest through tree planting and care, education, advocacy, and land conservation. Their vision is to create a healthy urban forest for all, inspiring and engaging people to maintain plants and protect trees. They believe that all people have the right to benefit from the many health, environmental, and social benefits that trees provide. And lastly, Tree Pittsburgh's main claim is that a greener city will create more vital communities for generations to come in the future. And a little bit about history behind Tree Pittsburgh. Basically, members of the Pittsburgh Shade Tree Commission organized Tree Pittsburgh, formerly Friends of the Pittsburgh Urban Forest, in 2006 to carry out fundraising, education, and stewardship activities aimed to restore and protect Pittsburgh's trees. Some of their accomplishments was in 2021, Tree Pittsburgh was able to plant 50,000 trees, 18,000 pruned trees, and 50,000 trees, and they were able to grow 50,000 trees in total in 2021. They were able to distribute 12,000 trees, get 10,000 volunteers engaged, and get 18,000 students engaged in 2021. And lastly, in 2010, Tree Pittsburgh established the Heritage Nursery, in which trees are grown from locally collected seeds. So why do we need nonprofits such as Tree Pittsburgh? Obviously, climate change is a huge problem, not only in the United States, but globally, but particularly, specifically in Pittsburgh, in our city. We do a great job of tackling this head-on, as it is one of the 25 cities chosen for its vision and leadership on climate action. Tree Pittsburgh is crucial to helping fight climate change because by planting trees, you remove carbon dioxide from the air, you store carbon in the trees and soil, and you're ultimately releasing oxygen into the atmosphere. So overall, it's just a successful nonprofit organization that fights our battle against climate change by ultimately planting more trees in our areas. Yeah.
Thank you, Jaden. That is a great presentation. Also very close to home here at Pittsburgh and something very local to our region and how we are working towards to better and the climate change efforts and all that. Just question for you, how did you find this organization, or did you already know about it, or like why did you pick this one? I mean, I'm sure there's multiple climate change active organizations around the Pittsburgh region, so what brought you to this one?
I was actually assigned it.
You were assigned it,
Yeah.
okay. Well, that works too then. So that's very great. All right, well then we can move on to the next presenter before we get into any more discussion. So we will go with Tessa, I believe.
For my focus of my nonprofit was Pittsburgh Parks Conservancy. Pittsburgh's Parks Conservancy works to fight climate change and resiliency through making an impact in the surrounding community by making green spaces available that are more sustainable and healthy for the community and the environment. Their mission and value includes improving quality life for the people of Pittsburgh by restoring park systems to excellence in partnership with government and community. Something I found really interesting about this nonprofit was their engagement with the public and the involvement they have. So they reach out to the neighborhoods and surrounding public and involve them in the planning and maintenance of these parks to help them not only get a sense of pride with their community, but also to help educate and spread awareness for environmental causes such as climate change. And through that allyship and partnership, they aim to grow to younger generations through park programs, Earth Day, yoga events, and tree funds where we can all learn and grow together to tackle climate resiliency. They have worked in many of the parks around our areas, and they are currently implementing a phase 2 of their plan, which where they're listening more to the community input and involving them to create a passion and collaboration with public for more sustainable ways. Their work includes creating more green infrastructure and spaces that will fight carbon dioxide release and water waste management. And they have, as far as their strategic plan, they are aiming to spread awareness and advocacy for this environmentalism cause. They want to improve recreational quality for the public, but also sustainable processes. They also are passionate about bringing equity to the city neighborhoods and raising the environment and the community to a higher quality. And then finally, their sustainability focuses on mimicking natural processes to create better parks and stronger communities.
Thank you, Tessa. Another great presentation local to the Pittsburgh region, so it's always good to see when we have posters and presentations based on something that's maybe not just a global impact or even a nationwide impact, but a city impact that's right here in our region, and how something that we're doing is combating towards the efforts for climate change, and obviously with the different parks around Pittsburgh and what they're doing to better the efforts. That's a great presentation. So before we get into any further discussion, we'll move on to one more presentation from this class, and that'll be Alyssa. Alyssa right there. Okay, we'll move on to her presentation then. So take the floor, Alyssa.
I chose Three Rivers Waterkeeper for my nonprofit, and they were founded in 2009, and their main aim is to protect the water quality of the three rivers in Pittsburgh, to make sure that they're safe to drink and swim, and just for all of the residents of Pittsburgh to enjoy. It was interesting to learn about the historical background of pollution and water quality in Pittsburgh, and just with industrialization in the 1800s, there was a lot of pollution and like sewage waste going into the rivers, and with the steel boom, like thousands and thousands of tons of water being used to make steel, there's a lot of damage done to the Pittsburgh rivers. So I appreciate this nonprofit protecting the water quality. They specifically respond to climate resiliency, which is adaptation, collaboration, and action, through their 4 programs that they have. So they have 4 programs I have listed in the bottom left, and these programs just serve as a means of action to kind of go into the rivers and clean them up, and also involve the community in volunteering. They have volunteer programs where residents can actually keep watch over the rivers and report any pollution or any contamination that they see. They use social media, and they go to like the Carnegie Science Center and other organizations just to reach out and let people know about the organization and what they're trying to do. They also collaborate with a lot of other nonprofit organizations with similar visions. And they currently have a strategic plan that's 3 years that they are collaborating with several other larger nonprofits in Pittsburgh, and their aim is just to improve the water quality of Pittsburgh and make sure it's safe and free of pollution and contamination for all of Pittsburgh's residents.
Thank you, Alyssa. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to ask all of you that have presented so far, so Courtney, Jaden, Tessa, and Alyssa, to think for a moment or a few moments of what your key takeaway is from your poster. You know, if you were to give like a one-liner, you know, somebody who's never heard your presentation or seen your poster, what is your key like one-liner takeaway? I'll give you a few moments to think about it, so I'm not, don't have to put you immediately on the spot. So while they're thinking of their responses to that, I'll throw it back to the audience. If you guys now have any more questions, comments, reflections on any of these 3 posters that you've seen that are unique to our Pittsburgh region, and how we're working here in Pittsburgh to better our efforts towards climate change, or any of those effects and stuff like that. And if you want to express any reflections or comments or questions regarding any of those past 3 presentations, now is the time for that. We have Noah running around with the microphone yet again. Thank you so much.
So I want to thank you 3 for a wonderful presentation, and it's great learning about the local nonprofits. I know some of you chose and some of you were assigned kind of your nonprofits, and so it's great to hear about the local nonprofits here as part of this. Part of the assignment was the choice was only from local nonprofits, but you guys did a great job. Now, the one thing I think was interesting is all 3 of those nonprofits are dedicated to getting the community out and involved in the environment. So all 3 have some sort of participatory, Alyssa's posters up here. There's the sort of water monitoring. I know at Duquesne, we even have on our sciences, there's involvement with that program. So it's an interesting sort of approach to sort of nonprofits, really focusing on a participatory nature, getting people out into the environment. So that was the one thing I thought was an interesting kind of thread through the 3 kind of presentations, is that participatory element that all 3 of them sort of stress, getting people out and participating in the in the environment and in Pittsburgh and the nonprofits. So thanks.
All right, so I have one question for all three of you. Based on the success of these three nonprofits, do you think this is something that could be modeled in other cities?
Yeah, I think absolutely this could be modeled in other cities. What I really liked about Pittsburgh Parks, and a reason why I chose it, was their allyship with the community and the involvement that they get. And not only does it help make the environment more sustainable and help model and mimic natural processes, but it also creates a sense of pride with the community. And the restoration of all of these parks focuses on maintaining the historical value that has previously been there. So it also benefits cities in showing their history as well as supporting their environmental cause. So I think overall it could be a good model for other cities to look into and restore some of their areas that might be getting overlooked.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with what she's saying because, like, for example, mine, there's like many ways they get the community involved as well. Like they offer a ton of internships for students actually also to get involved with Tree Pittsburgh as well. So I would say it's never be a bad thing ever to help fight climate change ever. So I would say find ways to improve our environment. So I think other cities should take notice and try and do the same.
Yeah, I would also agree, but I think one thing about my nonprofit was, like Dr. Garrett said, the monitoring of the rivers. So that's something that, you know, you don't even have to be connected to a nonprofit. We can all play a part in monitoring pollution, reporting things if we see it, and just all trying to help out collectively to keep the environment safe.
Any other comment? Did Courtney comment? Do you want to comment? No? Okay, that's all right. So then we'll go back to my original question then from the three of you. What would be your major takeaway or your one-liner from your poster presentation that you would want anyone to know about what your topic is? You can just start with, go down the line then, if Courtney, if you want to start.
Okay, so I think overall, even though animal experimentation is so harmful to the environment, as of right now, it's still very necessary for us to protect us, and so we're not using products that are going to harm us or, yeah, cause any harm to us.
All right, so for mine, I would just say overall, Tree Pittsburgh is a nonprofit organization which brings our community together to ultimately just fight the world's battle, I guess, with climate change.
For Pittsburgh Parks, I would say together through allyship and partnership with the community and a sense of pride for our history, we can make a difference to help respond to climate change and demonstrate resiliency.
And for Three Rivers Waterkeeper, I would say that the Pittsburgh Three Rivers are so essential to all of us, and water quality is something that affects every person in Pittsburgh. So that, like Tessa said, with the community and with outreach and with everybody's help, we can all work to protect Pittsburgh rivers.
Awesome, thank you. Are there any other questions, comments, reflections from any of these presentations? I'll give you a last second. You can remember, raise your hand and we can get the microphone to you if you have any other questions, comments on any of these sections. Not a lot. Okay, all right, well, let's give them a round of applause again for their great work. All right, so we'll head on to the next set of presentations then, and we'll go to, I think Paige is next, yes, for hers. Okay.
Okay, hi, we're co-presenting, I'm Annie. So our topic is adaptation versus mitigation, preventing and reducing greenhouse gas emission. So we all know that the main goal of handling the effects of excessive greenhouse gases is to mitigate those or reduce those, but it's also necessary to acknowledge that there's a lot of irreversible damage from greenhouse gases on the earth. So we as a society must not only mitigate greenhouse gases, but also focus efforts on adaptation to the current and future effects of climate change. So just a little background, currently there's over 40 billion tons of greenhouse gases emitted globally, with America being the second highest country to emit those. We've seen an almost 50% increase in greenhouse gases in the last 30 years. And these are major contributors to respiratory diseases, extreme weather, food supply disruptions, forced animal relocation, wildfires, and flooding of coastal cities, to name a few.
Okay, so looking at the methods of mitigation, one big one is utilizing nuclear energy. This is known to decrease greenhouse gas emissions as well as carbon emissions. And then also having electricity production from oil, gas, and coal sources. Although this is known to increase greenhouse gas emissions, it is less intense than fossil fuel production. And then so a few specific ones is agriculturally, just managing nitrogen to meet crop needs can reduce N2O emissions, as well as manipulating animal diet and manure management can reduce CH4 and N2O emissions. Looking at transportation, increasing public transportation efforts, car transportation alone accounts for 47% of carbon footprint of the typical American family. Also increasing, relying on low emission transportation sources. Hydroelectric sources produce less emissions than those relying on electricity from coal plants. And then also investing in energy efficient vehicles, as well as investing in city and road infrastructure to ease the ability to travel on foot. Looking at the methods of adaptation, two specific ones are stabilization and agriculturally. So for stabilization, looking to preserve large areas of open space to better protect ecosystems that might be under pressure from changing climates. And then also designing buildings with adaptation and resilience in mind. This includes green infrastructure, green roofs, and then passive survivability design, which is habitable under urgent conditions. So being able to survive without power and so that the temperature does not change and there's good insulation. And then also planning effectively, we have to plan for the alternate future scenarios and reflect upon uncertainties and gaps in knowledge. And then also identifying and covering major driving forces of these greenhouse gas emissions. And then for agriculturally, just creating policies to manage risk that regulate the marketplace and develop infrastructure. And then also educating and training people on innovative inputs and practices while facilitating the fusion of technologies and practices.
So just to conclude, while mitigation is aimed at tackling the causes and minimizing the impacts of greenhouse gases, mitigation only will fail. So it's important to recognize that adaptation will be key to lessen the impacts of climate change. And some ways that we can do both of these simultaneously is improving energy efficiency and opting for renewable energy sources, promoting ecological industry, agriculture, livestock farming, et cetera, taking the use of fossil fuels and, taxing the use of fossil fuels and CO2 emissions, improving infrastructure, and diversifying crops in a few other ways. So if we are able to do these things, in the next 10 years, we can expect an increase in public transportation and shared electric cars with energy efficient agricultures, and architecture and town planning, an increase in homes being fed by renewable energy, fewer parking zones, more urban allotments, parks, and gardens.
Thank you both. "10 years, that's not a long time from now. That's obviously, that's within our lifetime, hopefully for most of us. And I mean, that's a change that you're going to be able to see and realize. And it's not like when you listen to some of these climate change predictions and things like that, they're way far out into the future and stuff, which is fine. I mean, for planning purposes, you do need to plan that far out for changing some of your global emissions and things like that. But I mean, you can see right there, in 10 years, this is how we're going to have an effect into the world by adapting and using this mitigation methods that you're describing there. So well done there. That's awesome. We'll move on to the next one here. Then we have Kayla and Isabella then co-presenting as well. So I think you guys are up.
So our topic was
the effects, contributors, and solutions to improper wastewater management. So wastewater is fresh water that has been affected by domestic and industrial processes. The domestic sources include household water usage such as showering and using the toilet or sink, and industrial sources include water used to complete any manufacturing process. Through our research, we found 3 main types of wastewater. So decaying organic matter and excess phosphorus and nitrogen, chlorine compounds and metals, and then bacteria, disease-causing pathogens, pharmaceuticals, and personal care products.
So for how wastewater affects our environment, first, it pollutes and contaminates our water supplies. Only a fraction of global wastewater is collected, and only a fraction of the collected water is then treated and reused. The remainder of the water is just returned into the environment as is. So those pollutants affect different ecosystems by making the water uninhabitable for aquatic life. And runoff especially affects surface water sources with sewage pollutants. And then the contaminated surface water is then reused as drinking water, or it's cycled back into the ecosystem.
So how does wastewater affect climate change? Natural disasters caused by climate change directly impact the availability of safe drinking water for humans, and wastewater treatment procedures emit greenhouse gases. So it's also a cycle. Extreme weather caused by climate change makes drinking water scarce, which in turn causes increased emissions to treat the remaining water. So by addressing the overuse of freshwater sources, we can craft solutions to maintain drinking water standards and reduce greenhouse gas emissions.
So we identified a few different contributors to wastewater. First, the role of humans. Only 1% of the water on Earth is safe for humans to consume, but everyday tasks that we do in the home can use gallons and gallons of water, and this includes using your washing machine, flushing your toilet, and using any other appliances that uses water. Leaky pipes in the home can also waste gallons of water over time, and then if you have metal pipes in the home, it directly contributes to water contaminants.
So companies such as Coca-Cola and Google use millions of gallons of water every day in the operation of their facilities. Corporations heavily contribute to water shortages, especially in rural areas. And companies can also privatize public water systems for their own use by purchasing them.
So for the wastewater treatment facilities themselves, they can't keep up with the increased demand for clean water. And to treat the water like we talked about before, these facilities use fossil fuels, so they have a pretty large carbon footprint. Substances like nitrogen and phosphorus in the water are especially harmful, but the standard for filtering them out is very vague. And some facilities physically don't have the capability of reducing the levels of these substances. So they're then introduced back into local bodies of water. But upgrading these facilities to have the correct technology is expensive, so it's often just not done.
So there are a few solutions to decrease wastewater. So for humans, the EPA recommends that we check our pipes in our homes regularly for leaks or contamination. We should also avoid putting harmful materials down the drain because those materials may not be fully filtered out during the treatment process. And then the EPA also suggests for individuals to monitor their water usage, but at-home water-saving techniques may not be feasible for certain individuals or families.
So for solutions for corporations, first of all, the corporations need to commit to better water conservation practices. So this could be cutting down on the volume of water that they use for different processes or reducing the amount of contaminants and pollutants that they introduce into the water. Also, the corporate privatization of the public water systems has left many communities vulnerable to shortages of clean water. So the states themselves need to enact stronger legislation to protect those vulnerable communities.
And then last, for treatment facilities, stronger government regulations and more funding is necessary for the proper operation of these facilities. There needs to be legitimate standards set for how the water is treated. And then the lack of resources and uniformity has caused humans and the environment to suffer from polluted water.
Let's give a hand for Kayla and Isabella. That was another awesome presentation. You talked about like the volume of water that each person can use and how that can affect the total contribution in here. Like, do you have do you have in your mind or in any kind of idea what kind of volume? Like, if we all reduced our volume of water usage by, how much? Like, or like an approximate amount? Like, what kind of effect would that have on the overall environment? Do they give any statistics like that relate to like if we all reduced our consumption of and use of water by like however many gallons or liters or something like that, like that would have this sort of kind of impact?
Right, so we talked about how sometimes like the at-home water solutions, like, you know, not running the tap when you're brushing your teeth or whatever, sometimes it's not feasible for individuals to do. So even if us as individuals were to decrease the amount of water that we use on a daily basis, it still pales in comparison to how much big corporations use. So even if we were to reduce what we did, the overall impact of it would be minimal if corporations themselves didn't change.
And so then how do we get the corporations to cooperate? What do you plan to do for that?
Yeah, so that was a big roadblock that we kind of ran into. This also has to do with them privatizing the public water supplies. Because once you privatize these supplies for like the corporation's own personal use, the standards are kind of up to the corporations themselves and not regulated as a public water supply would be. So that's why we suggest like stronger legislation on a state-by-state basis to control this.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. Appreciate it. Great presentation. One more round of applause for them. Okay, and then we have Grace and Erica, I believe, next. Let me get your slide up. Okay.
So we looked at the environmental impacts due to food waste in grocery stores. And to start on a global scale, we found that 133 billion pounds of food are wasted every year in the United States. And this contributes to 3.3 billion tons of methane being emitted into the environment due to landfills. We found that this contributes to 8 to 10% of greenhouse gases in the environment. And along with this, we found that 10.5% of humanity is still malnourished, even due to this food waste.
So at a grocery store level impact, about 30% of the food in all grocery stores is wasted. And this can be because of sell-by dates, which does not equal expiration dates. It's just when the product is at its peak. It also can be because produce isn't pretty. It can be because cans are dented, boxes are broken, even while the food inside is still viable for use. So this also can be due to overproduction or underconsumption from the clients themselves. So the issue with grocery stores not donating their waste is because of education mainly. It also is because local programs or manpower is not available for them to actually sort through the food that needs to be donated, transport it to local food banks, that type of thing. One interesting thing we found was that the federal government actually offers a 15% taxable income deduction for donating your food. So in addition to that, some counties throughout the United States actually offer an additional $50,000 grant for corporations to donate their food as well. So there is some incentive for these companies to be donating.
Besides the monetary impact of, donating your food, we found that affecting communities is a big impact. Worldwide, it was found that a third of people do not have adequate food access, whether this is grocery stores or just any kind of monetary way to purchase food. And this leads to 38 million people in the United States being food insecure. With these efforts from the grocery stores reallocating their food, we could supply food banks or food drives, and we could focus on the communities in need. We would have to make sure that the people who don't have access to affordable groceries could be given these reallocation sources, and we could reduce the waste that is provided overall.
So basically, what still needs to be done to fill this gap between grocery stores and communities in needs, pretty much the local companies need to be educated about this food waste issue, and then also they need to be dedicated to their communities and reducing that waste. We also need a lot more organizations like nonprofits that help sort through these foods, transport these foods, and then also distribute these foods to the communities. There's also, at a global level, the EPA has a hierarchy, which is this little tiny triangle, basically with landfills being the absolute last disposal method, and having donation or composting as other viable sources for food waste. Also, we need to make sure that people who are food insecure or malnourished in communities have access to these possible food drives and reallocation sources.
Overall, that is our project. I want to just give a special thank you to my good friend Hannah at Sharing Access. It's a Philly-based transportation service that does exactly what the gap is needed. And then we also have a QR code at the bottom to 412 Food Rescue, which is a local food bank that also does these transportation from food waste at grocery stores to local communities.
Thank you. I love that, a QR code and everything, so you can have a direct impact in some way to the community and help with the food shortages and things like that, and the food waste that's going on. That's a really awesome presentation. So while I'm going to put something to the audience here, I'll ask the last three co-presenters, Anna, Paige, Kayla, Isabella, Grace, and Erica. I'll ask you guys the same question that I asked the earlier group. Give me your main takeaway, your key, your one-liner that you'd like anyone who has not heard your presentation, or if they're, you just wanted to pass them in the elevator or something, give that quick elevator pitch to the audience. I'll give you a few moments to think about it, so, sit tight for a second. But while you guys are thinking about that, this time we're going to throw it back to the audience then for some hopefully general discussion and questions and comments on these set of presentations. I'd like to hear, there's a large audience for this session, so I'd really like to talk amongst your tables for a few minutes and see if you have any comments or questions on any of these presentations. We'd really like to see some more involvement. So we'll take a few minutes to just do that. Thank you. Okay, everybody. All right, so we'll take a few moments now to hopefully you talk amongst your tables and we have a few questions or comments, and then maybe even some of the presenters here can respond to any of your questions or comments. So please raise your hand and we'll have one of the mic runners get the mic to you, please.
I just had a quick comment. I really liked the whole layout. It was super easy to read. Your goals are clear. What needs to be done, and then the fact that you put something up there afterward, I really liked it. Nicely done.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have another one right here. Yeah, thanks.
Hello. I think you guys did a really good job explaining these very complex issues in a very clear way, so gold star, everybody. I'd like to hear about what you think that we here at Duquesne University can be doing on these issues, or on the flip side, what we're already doing that we're doing a good job about.
I actually volunteered with the ministry a couple months back, and they take leftover food from Hogan and redistribute it to homeless people in the community. So I think that's a really great thing that we're doing here at Duquesne, and definitely can be maybe allocated to students in need, stuff like that. So.
Anyone else up here want to take a tackle at that question?
Yeah, we have something. So.
Move the mic up a little bit.
Oh, sorry. So, for anyone who lives on campus currently, we've all been experiencing we've all been experiencing like surprise water shortages recently for a few of the dorms on campus. Personally, for us, there have been several times where we've turned on the faucet and brown water has come out. Yeah. So that's not necessarily like something that the school can fix, but I think something for like the city of Pittsburgh as a whole to fix the water lines so that issues like that don't happen. Because on our campus, like, I'm sure a lot of people in this room have experienced shortages of clean water itself. So yeah, I would say that that's a good place to start.
I definitely would agree with that. I think we've all gotten our fair share of emails from the university of different closures of the roads and all the construction that's going on down here on Fifth Avenue or Forbes, and replacing all the water main breaks. So yeah, it's definitely important, and hopefully the city's taking care of that. Any other questions and comments from the audience? We have one over here.
Okay, one thing that we were talking about specific to the food waste is how I know for especially restaurants, there's a lot of restrictions on what you can and can't donate, specifically like restricting you from donating old food. And Becca was talking about how she used to work at Dunkin' and they couldn't like donate the donuts.
So I wasn't sure if you had any ideas or just knowledge about that kind of stuff.
I've also worked in a restaurant, so I understand the properties about throwing out food can be considered a loss of money. But I think the point that Erica brought up that was really helpful is that we've included this point about the tax write-offs that companies can use. So it's more of a source of initiative for them to be like, I know you feel like you're giving away money by reallocating these sources, but if you can put it on your taxes that you're technically giving to charity, I feel like that could be a little bit better incentive for people to help like with the food waste. Did that answer the question? Okay.
Any other comments towards that, or any other questions or comments from the audience then? Tables, group discussions, anything? No? Okay. Not seeing any more hands go up. Okay. Well, let's give everybody a big round of applause from this section up here. Some beautiful posters from Dr. Bates, Dr. Garrett, and Dr. Farrar's classes. So let's thank them all for that. And you all may now have a seat. So now we're going to pull up our next set of presenters who are my colleagues here in the healthcare or global healthcare ethics program. We are the graduate students. We have Amanda, Scott, and Fela up here to give their presentations as well. So hit them with good questions later on. All right, so I think first up we have Fela's, yes.
All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Fela Jr., and I am a PhD student at the Center for Global Health Ethics. The title of my work is In Evolving Climate, the Ethical Analysis of Genetics, Designer Wombs, and IVF Resiliency. So my goal for this kind of presentation is to kind of just give you a little bit of a roadmap of the why, the what I'm doing, and then the how I plan to execute this, because it can seem like, what? How do these things go together? So the why behind my project really is I have an interest in reproductive health, and specifically kind of moving into the transplant aspect of it. So uterus transplantation has been where I've camped out so far in my studies. And so as my studies have evolved, I've kind of taken on these different aspects of my goals and just saying, okay, we're in genetics now, so then how can I also apply this to climate? How can we kind of go beyond what we're doing now? So the what behind this is what I wanted to do is just also play on the words of climate, so a little bit of a play on words. So you have these two kind of branches of, you have the environmental part of climate, but then you also have the social aspect. So from that last presentation, you heard about the communities and who's being affected. So what is that going to do to the social climate as well? So my goal for this is, well, moving into mine now. For the environmental aspect of it, we have this environment and how it's shifting. Last week it was 70 degrees, and then the next day it was 19 degrees and snowing, right? So that was kind of tough, but also not only taking into the weather account of it, but also taking into the account of what that's doing to agriculture, livestock, and when you have what they're eating, so fertility of the soil. And with what they're eating kind of comes into what we're eating, right? Because we don't live in a bubble, we're part of this ecosystem. So you have that environmental aspect of it, and then you also move into the social aspect of social climate, reproductive climate specifically for me. And so for the reproductive climate that I've been working in is, if we continue to see these things and the fertility is being affected of our crops, then what is that going to do to our fertility as humans? So specifically, I've been working on assisted reproductive technologies and just diving into a little bit of that. And then how society is going to cope with those different climate changes that are happening in society. And then how will these societal norms start to change, and how will that affect us and how we see reproductive technologies, how we view these just different norms. So tying in that resiliency, I think in both categories of climate, we also have to show a bit of resilience. And okay, if we're here at this conference, right, so we all have to be resilient in a way that brings this fertility in the soil, help the fertility in human beings. And so that was the what. And so the why, or the how, I plan to do this, the goals for my research is I really liked the subtitle, the subheading, really of the collaboration, adaptation, and action, and just asking myself, okay, what are the different ways that we can collaborate with really environmental? How can we adapt as humans, and then what actions are we going to take here? And so just a couple bullet points I have. Again, what do we expect human fertility to look like as the climate starts to change? Because again, we don't live in a bubble. What determinations are we going to have to do? What investigations are going to happen? Research. I've done a couple different researches about how this actually is impacting us as humans, so still fresh in that, but just diving into it, and it's really fascinating to keep on going. And then lastly, this resilience and just really being attentive to our different communities as we navigate the environmental and then social aspects of climate. Thank you.
Thank you, Fela. So really, if I'm understanding what your presentation correctly, you're really talking about, in a way, how epigenetics is influenced here throughout with human fertility specifically. So how in epigenetics, if you're not familiar with that term, you can Google it, but it's basically how the environment affects our genes, and because there's multiple different ways and factors that the environment can affect us. I mean, think about like a common example with epigenetics is when you get sunburn and you have a lot of sun exposure and stuff like that, and that can cause melanoma and different skin cancers and things like that. But that affects our genes and our genetics at the same time. So that's just one of the common examples. But I think that's a really interesting way. And obviously, as you said, we don't live in a bubble here. And so as the environment is changing, and hopefully we can keep it from changing too much to a degree that it's going to extremely affect our fertility rates and things like that. But that's a really awesome presentation. Thank you, Fela. So I think up next now we have Amanda's presentation, so we'll move on to them, and then I'll still ask you all the same questions that I asked the undergrads. I will ask for that one-liner at the end after all three of you presented for your key takeaways from your presentations. So think about that. But go ahead, Amanda.
Perfect. So hi, everyone. My name is Amanda. I'm a master's student here at Duquesne in the Global Health Ethics. Today I'm going to talk to you about resiliency and prenatal genetic testing. Before I talk to you about resiliency within prenatal genetic testing, it's important to know what exactly prenatal genetic testing is. So prenatal genetic testing can be viewed in many different ways, like expecting mothers doing blood tests to see potential disorders, or 3D ultrasounds to see physical disorders the baby might face. The number and variety of prenatal genetic testing is growing daily, and availability to obtain these tests is easier than ever before. Prenatal testing has been offered over the past few decades by genetic specialists, but have recently been available to order through obstetricians. Depending on the genetic test that's being ordered for the expecting mother, the test has the ability to determine any chromosome abnormalities, inborn errors of metabolism, or neural tube impairments, and even single gene disorders. So, where did prenatal genetic testing get its start? The oldest reference for genetic testing dates all the way back to 1917 with the use of x-rays to diagnose anencephaly by James T. Case. Anencephaly is a brain and skull removal, just in case anyone was wondering, or missing, I should say. The utilization of amniocentesis, which is in a procedure which amniotic fluid is removed from the uterus for treatment or testing, which dates back all the way to 1883. With diagnosing excess amniotic fluid, and is increased around 1955 when it discovered that the use of the fetal cells in that fluid can diagnose the gender. So there was also use of chorionic villus sampling, also known as CVS, which is the aspiration of tissue that will later become the placenta, which was first done in Copenhagen in the late 1960s. CVS testing is more invasive than amniocentesis and is not offered by many obstetricians. Amniocentesis and CVS testing are both invasive and have greater risks for expecting mothers, creating a push for broader testing options that are less invasive and a decrease of risk for the mother and the fetus. So, this brings me to the present prenatal genetic testing and all that's offered to expecting parents. Prenatal genetic testing has gone from invasive and hard to obtain procedures to easily available and offered by most obstetricians. Today, many expecting mothers receive blood tests to determine genetic disorders and gender, as well as different types of ultrasounds. Over the past decade, there has been the implementation of blood tests that can tell expecting parents the gender of the fetus and chromosome abnormalities as early as 9 weeks into the pregnancy with a high accuracy rate. Ultrasounds have also been used since 1960 with the ability to diagnose structural abnormalities, heart defects, and other specific disabilities depending on the type of ultrasound. Some examples of these different types of ultrasounds include 3D ultrasounds that allow for providers to detect facial abnormalities or neural tube defects, and Doppler ultrasounds that bounce back off of moving objects like blood cells to help provide details on a baby's blood flow. These newer advancements allow for a safe way for mothers to get genetic testing for the fetus in a timely manner with high accuracy results. This has made prenatal genetic testing more resilient and puts a positive outlook for the future of prenatal genetic testing. So what does the future look like for prenatal genetic testing? Prenatal genetic testing can be utilized to help with major diseases like cancer or diabetes with more research into a baby's genetic strand. Looking at COVID-19, there will most likely be research done on the genetics of a baby's mother or father who have had COVID and the antibodies of COVID-19 to see if they are passed on to the child or not. Research might also be conducted to see if babies are affected in any way by their parents having COVID prior to the pregnancy, or if the mother gets COVID during the pregnancy, or other factors relating to COVID. Being able to do the genetic testing now can increase resiliency with future pregnancies and genetic disorders that might be passed on to the unborn fetus. Thank you.
Thanks, Amanda. Another great presentation here. Prenatal genetic testing, that's awesome, concept, and obviously developing the future forward and how we can be more resilient and pre-plan for things like that when people are very related to your fertility, kind of issue and stuff like that too. So very good presentation there. So we'll just move on to Scott before we hit with any questions and stuff like that.
Thank you, Andrew. And thank you, Phail and Amanda. Those are great presentations. Mine's going to be somewhat similar, but I'm going to go back a little bit to pre-implementation genetic diagnosis. So I'll start out, I guess, there. So good afternoon. I'm Scott Dyer. I am a PhD student in the Global Healthcare Ethics program. My poster, titled The Resiliency of Genetic Testing to Prevent Disease to Reduce the Impact of Healthcare Institutions on Climate Change and the Pursuit of Sustainable Healthcare, is a brief overview of just that. Specifically, how genetic testing can impact both the future health of humans and the Earth. More broadly, how the healthcare industry at large affects and contributes to global warming. So starting with PGD, or pre-implementation genetic diagnosis, which is a more specific version of what Amanda mentioned, is basically the process of testing cells of an embryo before undergoing in vitro fertilization in order to determine if the embryo has a genetic predisposition to a future debilitating disease, and then a robust debate immediately emerges from that. This debate circles around a few main points with the specific focus on whether or not embryos found to have these future diseases should be discarded or allowed to be brought to term. In discarding them, future human suffering is avoided. In allowing them to continue on with IVF and grow from an embryo to a fetus into a baby, the potentiality of a human life is realized. Should the embryo be brought to term, however, the future human is subject to a lifetime of medical care, which can carry immense physical, financial, emotional, social burdens. The list goes on. And then the lifetime of medical costs can easily reach into the tens of millions of dollars for some of these patients. For example, the average hemophilia patient spends about $275,000 a year on treatment. More severe cases can easily reach up to $600,000 or more annually. This results in $20 to $60 million for a lifetime of treatment not to mention the seizures, possible paralysis, chronic pain, social stigmatization, et cetera, et cetera. Every year, around 400 people are diagnosed with hemophilia, which can be detected and prevented via PGD. This carries with an $8.4 billion price tag for the lifetime of care required for each year of new cases. So the example of hemophilia is just one of many extremely expensive, painful, and preventable diseases. Others include, but are not limited to, cystic fibrosis, Tay-Sachs, muscular dystrophy, among others. On a macro level, the healthcare industry at large is largely responsible for a relatively significant portion of greenhouse gas emissions worldwide, around 4.5% of them. This doesn't seem like a lot on the surface, but it inherently is a very large number. And the healthcare system within the United States contributes to a quarter of that number. So over 1% of the global greenhouse gas emissions come from American healthcare institutions. These numbers come from one of three main sources. First, gases that are emitted from hospitals and healthcare institutions from things like boilers, exhaust systems, and medical gas releases. Second, indirect impacts through electricity purchased through for the hospitals to keep things running. And then third, greenhouse gases that are emitted through the supply chain during the production of energy, products, goods, and services for a given institution or hospital. Excuse me, there are some shocking numbers that emerged when looking at specific gases, specific gases emitted from facilities. In recent years, there's been a growing movement to refrain from using an anesthetic called desflurane and move towards propofol as much as possible. Desflurane is hundreds of times more harmful than its counterpart, propofol. It lasts in the atmosphere for about 10 years and has the greenhouse output equivalent to driving around 200 miles. Propofol, on the other hand, has the greenhouse effect of driving less than 1 mile. This is one example of many where alternatives must be researched and established as norms to reduce the impact of healthcare on the climate. Definitely forgot my 4th page notes, so I'm going to wing this part. It comes down to non-maleficence and beneficence. The healthcare system has a responsibility to carry out what is best for the environment as well as humans. A system that is made to heal humans should not simultaneously harm the environment. This not only comes down to the government at large that is morally obligated to put money towards this and help us on the ground here, but also healthcare institutions have a moral obligation and ethical duty to do so as well. They should be reallocating funds to renewable resources and sustainable practices. For example, we have solar panels on hospitals or sustainable food products, that kind of thing. And these, if carried out successfully, can uphold the beneficence and non-maleficence, which are two of the main tenets of healthcare ethics in general. Thank you.
Thanks, Scott. Those are some big numbers there that you have on your slide. $8.4 billion price tag for 400 cases of hemophilia. Like, imagine if that $8.4 billion went allocated into climate change action and stuff like that. What kind of impact that could have? That's amazing and that's crazy. So like hopefully they can start to try to reduce the number of cases like that so they can allocate those resources to becoming a more sustainable business and infrastructure. That'd be great. So right now I'll ask the three of you to provide, if you can give me that one-liner elevator pitch statement for your posters, just as a quick summary of what your main topic is, and share that with the audience. Fela, you can start if you want.
Okay. Is this on? Okay, so for mine, I think it's just really quick one-liners that environmental climate change affects social climate change, and then vice versa a lot, because I think we're doing this to the earth. So I think that is like my biggest takeaway. I think also from just learning more about this, the aspect of my project.
Cool. I'll go next. So with the prenatal genetic testing, I think we're moving more into a direction that's safer for expecting mothers, as well as using less resources that are, again, going to be safer. and more accurate, so we're not wasting more and more testing to get the results that mothers and fathers are wanting from their tests.
Thank you. So mine will be a little bit longer, I think. So I don't know if Kayla, Isabella, and Jason are still here, but all three of those two of those presentations earlier, because I believe Kayla and Isabella worked together, both of those presentations struck me I don't know, significantly because they touched on the anti-capitalist nature of what we should be doing, and the corporations that are inherently to blame for the current catastrophe that we're seeing. While individual life practices are important to adjust and change to help impact climate change or reduce climate change effects, it's the corporations that are truly at fault here. What's the main goal of a corporation? It's to make money. It's profits over people. That's what it comes down to, and that's problematic. When this happens, backtrack for a second, about 100 corporations are responsible for over 70% of the greenhouse gas emissions worldwide. So what happens when these companies break the law, when they go against the things that are put in place by judicial systems? They get fined. When Exxon, releases hundreds of thousands of gallons of oil into the sea, what happens? They get fined. They can afford to pay these fines. And then what happens? Nothing. They go on and continue these same practices. To overcome this, what should we do? Jail them, imprison these people. It sounds, kind of harsh or non-traditional, but that's what needs to happen. Because if it doesn't happen, they'll just continue to follow through these same exact practices, and the same things will continue to happen. Putting the onus on individuals is problematic. While we all can work harder to better our impact on the environment, it comes down to holding the people at the top accountable and showing real consequences for their actions.
Okay,
I'll end it there.
Yeah,
thank
you, Scott. Appreciate it. All right, I think you guys are going to get off easy, so I don't think we have enough time for questions from the audience. I think we have to wrap this session up here, so I'll hand this back over to Dr. McGill here, and yeah.
Thank you, Andrew, for a lovely facilitation of the session. There's a few points I want to make just before we go. To the undergraduates who presented outstanding work, your professors should be very proud of you. It was a magnificent tour de force. Professor Garrett, Professor Ferrara, Professor Bates, you have really nurtured fabulous students. You'll be great teachers, you'll be great leaders. You will change climate for us, I have no doubt, so thank you. The graduate students, you're doing great work. You're showing us that the future is going to be very much genetic driven in health. We have failed on mitigation. You've not failed. My generation failed you. Generations prior to me failed you. But you've inherited climate change. It's killing the planet. We're going to have to find ways not just to mitigate, but to antecedently protect. And genetics is going to be the great scorecard on that as we go forward. One other thing I wanted to say, so I didn't terrify the living daylights of the presenters, especially the undergraduates. This is being broadcast globally through live streaming just now as we speak. So you're now being recognized in Africa, in Asia, in Australia. Well done, especially undergraduates. You're now global presenters. And a special word to the Spiritans. We are celebrating the Spiritan mission in this conference and the Spiritan communities who are participating throughout the congregation. They're all very welcome. And I would be remiss to remind you that you are academics. We want you to be advocates, but you are academics. Over here are the books that we have presented, we have published from prior conferences. So those of you who have given us posters, those of you who have presented, send us an essay. I've talked to our publisher. They want to publish your genius, your insight, your wisdom. So thank you, everybody. It's been a fabulous session. Go save the world.